In 4 years at Seoul Central Medical, Dr. Kang Do-yeon had never once voluntarily spoken to a woman about anything that wasn't written in a patient chart. Not because he was rude, not because he was awkward, but because nothing, not beauty, not brilliance, not tears, not desperation, had ever given him a reason to. He had rejected a scrub nurse who slid a note under his locker door on a Tuesday. He had rejected the chief of radiology at the hospital gala, a woman so stunning that 3 attending physicians nearly walked into walls watching her cross the room. He had stood in the parking structure at midnight while a crying resident told him she'd turned down a fellowship in Paris because she couldn't bear to leave him. And he had felt nothing. Not guilt, not flattery, not even discomfort. Just the quiet, clinical certainty that whatever switch was supposed to flip inside a man when a beautiful woman looked at him that way, his had simply never been installed. 32 years, not one flicker. So on the Thursday morning that Kang Do-yeon set down his coffee, crossed the entire length of the 4th floor surgical wing, and stopped in front of a woman he had only known for 11 days, every single person who witnessed it went completely, absolutely still. She had her back to him. She was reviewing scans at the light board, her natural hair pinned back, her posture so straight and certain it looked carved into the room. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was completely unbothered, completely contained, completely uninterested in anyone around her. And something about that, something about the total absence of performance, had been slowly, quietly, undoing him all week. He stopped beside her. He said her name, Dr. Okafor. She turned, and for one brief second, just one, her dark brown eyes met his, and he felt something move in his chest that he had no language for. Something that made him want to stand in that exact spot for the rest of his life. He told her he wanted her to co-lead the Kim reconstruction case. He told her he had reviewed her surgical record. He told her, and this was the part the nurses nearest to him would replay in hushed voices for weeks, that he had specifically requested her. The hallway was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system. Dr. Felicia Okafor looked at the most powerful, most feared, most breathtaking surgeon in the building, and she said, "I don't co-lead. I lead. Find someone else." She turned back to her scans, and the man who had never felt a single thing in 32 years of living stood absolutely frozen, not in humiliation, not in anger, but in the terrifying, electric, total certainty that he had just found the only problem in the world he didn't already know how to solve. What he did next changed everything. And what she didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that the hospital she was standing in, the floor beneath her feet, the very badge around her neck, all of it belonged to him. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Nurse Cho later said it felt like watching a building settle after an earthquake. Everything still standing. Everything changed. Nobody moved for a full 3 seconds after Felicia turned back to her scans. Not the 2 nurses at the station. Not the resident pretending to review a chart 12 feet away. Not the orderly who had stopped mid-push with a supply cart and was now frozen in the corridor like he'd been paused by remote control. They were all watching Do-yeon. He stood at the light board. His coffee was still in his hand, still hot, a thin thread of steam rising from the cup into the recycled hospital air. His face was doing nothing. That was the thing people kept describing afterward when they tried to explain it to anyone who hadn't been there. His face was doing nothing. And somehow, that was the most alarming part. Because Kang Do-yeon's face always did nothing. Blank was his default. Cold was his register. But this nothing was different. This was the nothing of a man who had just had something happen to him that his entire nervous system was still in the process of categorizing. He looked at the back of her head. She was already scrolling to the next scan. He set his coffee down on the edge of the nurse's station counter. Quietly, deliberately, without looking at what his hand was doing, and he walked away. The ward exhaled. And then, because this was Seoul Central and its staff had the collective memory of a very invested Greek chorus, the whispers started before he'd even reached the elevator. He asked her. She said no. He asked her. And she said no. And he just walked away. Nobody could agree on what his expression had been. Nurse Cho said it was shock. The resident said it was something closer to calculation. The orderly, who had the best angle, said it was neither. He said it looked like a man who had just been told there was a door in the world he hadn't known existed, and was already working out which key would open it. He did not chase her. Here is what nobody at Seoul Central understood about Kang Do-yeon in those first 11 days. He was not sulking. He was not licking a wound. A man who had never been wounded couldn't lick what he didn't have. He was studying. He had spent his entire life studying things he wanted to understand. Cardiac anatomy at 14. Syndicate law at 17. Surgical technique at 22. He approached all of them the same way, with total attention, zero ego, and the patience of someone who understood that the fastest path to mastery was never speed. It was precision. He applied the same methodology to Felicia Okafor. 3 days after the rejection, a nurse at the 4th floor station noticed that the chair directly across from Dr. Okafor's usual spot in the cafeteria was occupied by Dr. Kang. Wasn't looking at her. He was reviewing patient files, his coffee untouched beside him, his expression exactly as unreadable as always. But he was there, and he stayed for the full length of her lunch break and left exactly 2 minutes after she did. By the end of the week, there was a running list. He sat in the physician's lounge on Monday at the precise hour she always took her afternoon break. He appeared in the East Wing Library on Wednesday evening, a habit she had never announced, never advertised, that he had simply observed and filed away somewhere in that meticulous, dangerous mind. His presence was never loud, never intrusive. He never addressed her, never manufactured a reason to speak. He simply existed nearby, steady and immovable, like weather. She knew. Of course she knew. She was not a woman who missed things, but knowing and having proof were different instruments. She was a surgeon. She operated without proof on nothing, so she accepted his proximity each day, with her expression perfectly composed, and she did not acknowledge him. And somewhere on the other side of the hospital, she was certain Kang Do-yeon noted her silence and found it more interesting than acknowledgement would have been. She hated that she understood him that well already. The coffee was the detail that undid everyone else. Felicia took hers black. No sugar, single shot of hazelnut. A specific, slightly inconvenient order the hospital cafe got wrong at least twice a week. On the Thursday after the rejection, she arrived at the surgical prep area to find a cup waiting beside her locker. Correct order. Still hot. No note. It happened again Friday. Again Monday. She told herself it was a coincidence. It was not a coincidence. She told herself it didn't matter. It mattered. She accepted the coffee and said nothing. And in the silence of that acceptance, something very small and very stubborn began, quietly, against her better judgment, to shift. Then the pileup happened, and everything changed. The choreography of elite Korean surgical teams, and why Seoul Central's OR culture is unlike any hospital in the world. The call came on a Saturday night at 11:47. Highway 47, northbound. A transport truck had jackknifed in the rain and taken out an entire lane of traffic. 14 vehicles, cascade impact, blunt force, penetrating trauma, a pediatric in the third car. The trauma board lit up like a circuit panel, and within 8 minutes, Seoul Central's surgical floors had become something that looked less like a hospital and more like a controlled detonation. Operating room 3 was the only suite with the equipment her patient needed. Dr. Kang had already been assigned it. The charge nurse looked at Felicia with an expression that very clearly said, "I know. I'm sorry. There is no other option on this earth." Felicia snapped her second glove into place, and walked through the doors. He was already there, already scrubbed, already reading the incoming chart with the focused stillness of a man who had decided, somewhere between the call and this room, that tonight had exactly one purpose. He glanced up when she entered, said nothing, moved left to give her the better angle on the field without being asked. She didn't thank him. She picked up her position and they began. What happened over the next 3 hours and 19 minutes became the thing the surgical staff described in hushed voices for a long time after. Not in press releases, not at conferences, but in the particular reverent quiet that doctors reserve for things they witnessed and don't have the vocabulary to fully explain. They didn't speak the way most surgical teams spoke. No redundant instructions, no negotiations over territory or technique. Felicia would shift her weight slightly left, and Do-Yun was already repositioning the overhead light before she reached her new angle. He would pause a half-beat in his suture line, and she was already adjusting the chow retractor. Without being told, without looking up, as if she had read something in the quality of his stillness and responded to it like a language she had always known. The scrub tech told the anesthesiologist afterward that it felt like watching two people who had trained together for a decade. The anesthesiologist, who had worked with Do-Yun for 6 years and had never once seen him synchronize with another human being, said nothing in response. He just nodded. They closed the patient at 3:14 in the morning. Vital stable. Blood loss within margin. Do-Yun peeled back his first glove and looked at her across the table. Not with triumph, not with the arrogance of a man requiring credit. Just looked at her. The way you look at something you have been trying to understand and have finally, partially, begun to. Felicia looked back. Brief. Controlled. Then she turned and pushed through the scrub room door, because the alternative was standing there looking at him for longer than she could justify to herself. She should have kept walking. She didn't. She made one critical error in that scrub room. She didn't leave fast enough. The ventilation worked poorly at this hour. Steam from the sinks collected near the low ceiling, and the fluorescent lights gave everything a slightly unreal quality. The kind of light that belongs to hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the rest of the world is asleep, and the people still awake are running on something that hasn't been properly named yet. Felicia was at the near sink, scrubbing down, eyes on her hands, breathing deliberate. She was regulating. The surgery was still moving through her system. That particular electric high that comes after something difficult and clean, when everything has gone exactly right and the body hasn't received the message that it's over. She heard the door, heard him enter, heard the second sink turn on. For a while there was only water. Then it stopped. She became aware of him the way you become aware of a change in atmospheric pressure. Before you can see it, before you can name the specific thing that shifted, your body simply knows. She kept her eyes on the sink, kept her hands moving. He stepped into her peripheral vision, then past it. When she finally looked up, he was directly beside her. Not at his sink, at hers. Close enough that she could see the specific exhaustion around his eyes, the fine tension along his jaw, the way his expression was doing something it almost never did, reaching, without quite arriving. "You should have told me earlier," he said. His voice was quiet, lower than usual. She turned off her tap. "Told you what? That you operate like that?" "Like what?" "Like you already know where I'm going before I get there." The fluorescent light hummed. Down the hall, a monitor beeped in steady, indifferent rhythm. "That's called competence," she said. "You should try it." The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, but the ghost of the architecture one might occupy, given permission. He shifted slightly. She didn't move back. The edge of the sink was against her hip now, and he was close enough that she could feel warmth coming off him in the recycled air of the room. His eyes dropped, just briefly, to her mouth, then back up. She had 4 cutting responses loaded and ready. She said none of them. His hand came up slowly, so slowly it was practically a question, and his thumb grazed the line of her cheekbone. Light. Barely there. The kind of touch that is technically nothing and registers as everything. Her eyes closed. She hated that they closed. She felt herself lean. 1 millimeter. 2. The involuntary physics of a body betraying every decision her mind had made repeatedly and firmly. The door exploded open. Dr. Kong. Sorry, there's a bleed in Bay 2. Dr. Shin says it's... The junior resident stopped, looked between them, processed, turned approximately the color of the scrub room walls. Do-Yun's hand dropped to his side. He stepped back with the absolute composure of a man who had not just been one breath away from dismantling 6 weeks of careful architecture. Bay 2, he said, as if confirming a room number. I'll be there. The resident disappeared so fast the door was still swinging. Felicia turned back to the sink, turned the tap on. She did not look at him when he left. She listened to his footsteps. She listened to the door. She stood at the sink with water running over her hands, looking at nothing, and being brutally, privately honest with herself about the fact that she had absolutely been about to let him. 3 days later, an American walked into the hospital and complicated everything. She thought the scrub room moment had been a fluke, a product of adrenaline and bad ventilation, and 3 hours of operating in perfect sync with a man who looked like that. She had filed it under situational and moved on. She was so wrong about that. It almost cost her everything. His name was Dr. Marcus Webb. He arrived with a visiting fellowship badge, a Johns Hopkins research portfolio, and the particular easy confidence of a man who had been called charming so many times he'd stopped performing it. It had simply become his resting state. He noticed Felicia at morning rounds. By afternoon, he had materialized twice, once outside the cath lab with a question about her bypass repair paper, once in the physician's lounge with 2 coffees, one of which he offered her with a smile that was, objectively, very good. She didn't encourage it, but she didn't shut it down with the efficiency she used on most people, because Marcus Webb was harmless and interesting, and she was, beneath all her self-possession, a human woman who occasionally appreciated being seen as a person rather than a title. She did not notice Do-Yun in the doorway of the lounge. She found out later. A nurse who had been watching, because this was Seoul. Central and its staff had the observational commitment of people whose lives depended on reading rooms correctly, told her. He'd stood there for 11 seconds, then turned and walked away. He hadn't looked angry, the nurse said. He'd looked interrupted. Felicia filed this, said nothing. The stairwell happened the next afternoon. She was between the 5th and 6th floors, 4 minutes before a consult, and Do-Yun appeared from the landing below and stopped directly in her path. Dr. Webb, he said. She tilted her head. Is there a question in there? He's been following you around this hospital for 2 days. He's been collegial, which people are allowed to be. He gave you coffee. You give me coffee every morning. That's different. How? A beat. He looked at her the way he sometimes did, like she was a problem he hadn't anticipated and couldn't stop thinking about. Because I'm not doing it to get something from you. You're doing it to get something from me. No. His voice dropped just slightly, the way it did when he meant something precisely. I'm doing it because you take it black with hazelnut and the cafe gets it wrong, and I don't want your morning to start badly. That's not the same thing as what he's doing. She stared at him. He seemed, for one brief moment, as surprised as she was by what had just come out of his mouth. Do-Yun? First time she'd used his given name. She watched it land. I've been managing men who want things from me since medical school. I don't need you monitoring my colleagues. I know you don't need me to. A pause. That's not why I'm standing here. Then why are you standing here? The stairwell was quiet. A door opened and closed somewhere above them. She could see him choosing, the precise moment he selected honesty over composure. Because I have wanted nothing, he said, for 32 years. Not one thing, not one person, nothing enough to move toward it. And then you told me no at that light board, and I have not had a single uninterrupted thought since. Even. Factual. As though reading a diagnosis. So when I watch another man stand in your space and smile at you, I don't behave well. I apologize for that. I'm not apologizing for what I just told you. She didn't move. Her hand was on the railing. He waited. I'm going to be late for my consult, she finally said. I know. She walked past him. 3 steps up, she heard him say quietly, almost to himself. He gets the coffee order wrong. She didn't answer, but she didn't tell him to stop sending his own either. 6 days later, a man arrived on a gurney and took everything apart. Here is what she didn't know about the world Do-yoon moved through. In that world, the most dangerous men never look dangerous. They look like the most composed person in any room. They look like someone who has never once been surprised. They look, in other words, exactly like a senior cardiothoracic surgeon at an elite Seoul hospital. The disguise was never a disguise. It was just the other half of who he was. The man came in on a gurney at 9 in the evening, and everything about him was wrong. Felicia knew it the moment she stepped into the trauma bay. The wound pattern was wrong, not the jagged, irregular damage of an accident, but something clean and deliberate, familiar to anyone who'd done a trauma rotation in a city with organized crime. The men who'd brought him were wrong. 3 of them. None in medical capacity, hovering at the bay's edges with the particular stillness of people professionally trained not to be noticed. The patient himself was wrong. Late 30s, no ID, a body that underneath the blood showed the dense, functional musculature of someone whose life had long required it. She stabilized him. She worked. She did not ask the questions she was already assembling. She was finishing her assessment when the trauma bay doors opened. She heard the room change before she turned. That specific hush when something enters a space and reconfigures it. When the air pressure shifts, and every person in the vicinity recalibrates without being told. She turned. Kang Do-yoon was not wearing his white coat. He was wearing a suit. Charcoal. Perfectly cut. Not a single concession to the fact that it was 9 in the evening. His shirt was dark. His tie was dark. Behind him, 2 men. Not hospital staff. Not doctors. They stood with their hands clasped and their eyes moving across the room in the measured, systematic sweep of people whose job was to identify problems before they arrived. The trauma team went very still. Do-yoon crossed to the gurney. He looked at the man on the table, and something moved across his face. Not concern exactly, but something in that territory. Something carrying the weight of obligation and history, and a life running entirely parallel to the one he performed here every day. He looked up at Felicia, and in that moment she understood. Not partially, not approximately, but completely, with the clarity of cold water, that she had been operating on someone who belonged to him. That the men at the edges of the room answered to him. That the suit and the guards and the authority radiating off him like a frequency were not anomalies. They were the truth. Everything else had been the costume. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her patient. At her chart. Then she said, in the calm professional voice she used when she needed everyone focused, I need the bay cleared except for essential surgical staff. Now. The non-hospital personnel moved to the perimeter. The team reoriented. The work continued. She did not look at Do-yoon again during the procedure. But she felt him there. Standing at the edge of the room in his dark suit, watching her save the life of a man whose wounds told a story she now understood entirely. And she was aware, with a precision she deeply resented, that some part of her had already been bracing for this, had already known. When the patient was stable, she stripped her gloves and walked out without a word. In the utility hallway, antiseptic and recycled air and harsh fluorescent truth, She stood with her arms crossed and waited. He came through 30 seconds later. The suit looked different in this light. Less like power, more like evidence. "How much of it is real?" she said. "The medicine is real. And the rest?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm everything. "I run something. Something that existed before I was born, that I inherited, that I have not yet found a way to—" He stopped. "It is not the part of my life that is in this hospital. But it's in your hospital, because I operate in your hospital." She held his gaze. "You own this building." "Yes." "The man on that table, was that the first time you've sent someone to me?" The pause was very small, but it was there. She nodded slowly. "Right. Felicia." "I need you," she said. "Me, quietly. To not be in my eyeline for a while." He stood in the utility hallway in his expensive, ruined certainty, and for the first time since she had met him, Kang Do-yoon looked like a man who did not know what to do with his hands. She walked past him. She closed the door precisely, completely, without drama, with the total, terrible finality of a woman who knew exactly how much force a thing required. What happened in the next 11 days? She didn't expect. Not any of it. How Korean crime organizations actually operate within legitimate business structures, and why hospitals are not as unlikely as you'd think. She gave him exactly what she'd asked him to give her. Nothing. For 11 days, Dr. Felicia Okafor moved through Seoul Central with the same straight posture, the same guarded precision, the same competence that had defined her since she arrived. She attended rounds, she operated, she drank her coffee. From the cafe now, hit or miss on the order. And she did all of it as though Do-yoon occupied the same category as the ventilation system. Present, functional, beneath active notice. He honored it. That was the part she hadn't anticipated. A man who had learned to express devotion through perfect coffee and calibrated proximity was not going to collapse her boundaries by arguing against them. He didn't seek her out. Didn't engineer run-ins. When their paths crossed, morning handoff, shared corridor, once in the elevator, he gave her the same courteous professional nod he gave the chief of surgery and stepped aside. He was so correct about it that it was almost infuriating. The coffee stopped, which was the right thing. It was also, she noted with private irritation, the thing she noticed first in the morning for 3 days straight. What she didn't know, what she only learned much later, was that the stopping was the only concession he made. Her apartment was a 12-minute drive from the hospital, a converted mid-rise with a ground-floor cafe and a parking structure that was never as well lit as it should have been. She had chosen it for proximity and anonymity. Nobody there knew who she was. She valued that the way she valued most things, quietly and completely. She didn't notice the dark sedan across the street until the 4th day, different plates each time, same quality of stillness. She noticed the man in the ground-floor cafe who ordered the same thing every morning and read a newspaper and was always already there when she came down. And one night, returning late from a double shift, she noticed that the broken bulb in the east stairwell had been replaced. Not by building maintenance. She had submitted that work order 3 weeks ago. No response. She stood in the lit stairwell for a long moment. Then she went upstairs and did not call him. Because he hadn't asked for a call? He had asked for nothing. He was simply, in the way he did everything, making sure the stairs were safe. Making sure his world's exposure of her would not reach the one place she had built to belong only to herself. She sat on the edge of her bed that night with her hands in her lap. She was not only angry, she had been rigorously, uncomfortably honest enough with herself to admit that. She was also afraid. Afraid of what she'd seen in that trauma bay. Afraid of how little it had moved the specific frequency he occupied in her chest. Afraid of what it meant that she could be this furious at a person and still, underneath it, feel safer knowing he was there. She had been here before. Not here exactly, but in this architecture. Someone powerful getting close enough to matter and then revealing the closeness had its own terms. She had rebuilt herself once from that. The work had been long and private, and she was not interested in doing it again. So she kept her distance, and she told herself it was enough. On the 12th day, someone else found her first. The parking structure under Seoul Central's east wing was 3 levels deep. The lowest level was always quiet in the early evening, that gap between day shift leaving and night staff settling, when the fluorescent lights buzzed against particular silence. Felicia was on level 2, walking toward her car, her mind already organizing tomorrow's surgical board, when she heard the footsteps. Too late to process before the man was already beside her. Not rushing, not aggressive, just suddenly, wrongly present. He was older, well-dressed in the specific way of people with a certain kind of money, understated, intentional, nothing that could be photographed and identified. He had a stillness she recognized from the men in the trauma bay, and her body understood the situation a full 2 seconds before her mind finished processing it. "Dr. Okafor?" he said pleasantly. "I've been wanting to meet you." She stopped. Her keys were in her hand. He held out a phone. Her. On the street outside her building. Distance shot. Surgical precision in the framing. He swiped. The hospital entrance. Her. Entering. The cafe on the ground floor through the window. Her. Reading. Her. Existing. Completely unaware. "You've been watched for some time," he said in the same pleasant tone. "I thought you should know." She kept her face neutral. Her heart was loud, and she refused to let it reach her expression. "What do you want?" A message delivered. "To the man watching you from the other direction." He smiled. It reached nothing. "Tell him his personal interests have made him vulnerable, that we consider that a professional courtesy, and that if he'd like to keep what he values safe, he should consider whether his current position is worth the cost." He pocketed the phone. "Enjoy your evening, doctor." He turned. 2 steps. Then he stopped. Not by choice. Because the figure at the entrance to the level had not moved aside. Do-yoon stood at the base of the ramp, hands in the pockets of his dark coat, looking at the older man with an expression that was completely empty. Not the controlled clinical emptiness Felicia knew, but something beneath that. Something with no temperature at all. Behind him, 2 of his men materialized from the shadows near the support columns, 2 more from the stairwell entrance on the other side. The older man turned slowly, reassessed. His pleasant expression didn't vanish. It recalibrated, which was in some ways much worse. Do-yoon walked forward, unhurried. Every step deliberate and quiet on the concrete. He stopped at a distance that was technically civil and absolutely not. "You came to my hospital," he said, in the same voice he used to dictate surgical notes. "To my building. To frighten someone who has nothing to do with your organization or mine." A pause. "I want to understand what conclusion you expected to reach by being here." "We were simply—" "I know what you were doing." His gaze didn't move. "I'm giving you an opportunity to correct the decision, before it becomes something you can't correct." Another pause. Shorter. "I suggest you take it." 4 seconds of silence in the parking structure. The older man looked at Felicia once more, calculating the specific weight Do-yoon had just revealed by coming here himself. Then he nodded once and walked toward the exit. His men fell in behind him. Their footsteps faded up the ramp. Gone. Do-yoon turned toward her, the expression he reserved for her. Open, careful, pained. He assessed her the way he assessed patients: eyes, posture, hands, breathing. "Are you hurt?" "No." Her voice was level. "You've had people on my street?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Since the man came into your trauma bay." 12 days. 12 days of distance she had drawn, and he had honored completely, and for every one of those days he had been quietly, invisibly making sure she was safe. without asking for a single thing in return. She had a specific, well-maintained framework for what powerful men did with their protection. It didn't look like this. It didn't look like silence and replaced light bulbs and four armed men dissolving back into shadows the moment the threat had passed. "You should have told me," she said. "You asked me not to be in your eye line." His voice was quiet. "I wasn't." She turned and walked to her car. She drove home without looking in the rearview mirror, but she knew he stood there until she had driven up the ramp and out into the street. She sat in her lit stairwell for a long time that night, not thinking, just sitting, just breathing. She never got to decide what to do with that information, because the next night, everything exploded. She thought she understood danger. She had trained in understaffed hospitals, operated through power failures, managed crises with tools that were never enough. She thought she knew what it felt like when a situation shifted from difficult to truly, physically threatening. She was wrong. She had never felt anything like this. The power went out at 8:43 on a Thursday, not the whole hospital. The backup generators caught everything critical within 4 seconds: ICU, surgical suites, main corridors. But the East Wing's 4th floor, Felicia's ward, her cardiac unit, 3 post-op patients and 2 pending consults, went dark in a way the generators didn't fully correct. Secondary systems only. Reduced visibility. The kind of targeted outage that someone who understood hospital infrastructure had designed from the outside. She understood it in the first 30 seconds. Not a fault. A choice. She was already moving to her patients before the emergency lighting finished flickering on. Nurse Park was at the station on the radio. 2 staff were pulling crash carts to manual positions. They were good. They were fast. Felicia moved through the ward, checking vitals, calm and sequential. Whatever was happening outside this ward, inside it, she was the attending, and her patients needed her to be exactly that. She heard the maintenance access door first. Badge restricted. Never used by clinical staff. It opened with a specific resonance she heard from 4 rooms away, and her body understood before her mind finished the sentence. 3 of them. She saw them when she stepped into the corridor, moving fast toward the nursing station, dressed in clothing designed to look like maintenance and not quite managing it. One saw her and altered course. Nurse Park made one sound and went silent in the way of someone who had been told to be silent. Felicia took 3 steps backward into the supply room and pulled the door almost closed. Her phone had no signal. They'd blocked it, she realized, because this had been planned down to the infrastructure. She pressed her back to the wall beside a shelf of surgical dressings and breathed through her nose and thought with total clarity about what she had and what she didn't. Footsteps in the corridor. Then, from the elevator bank, the main elevators which required key override. A chime. Voices. Different voices. The clipped rapid Korean of men who had trained for exactly this. Then impact. Movement. The sounds of a corridor being cleared with professional, systematic efficiency. 3 minutes. Maybe 4. The supply room door opened. Do-Yun stood in the doorway. Suit again, or a different one, it didn't matter. A tear at the shoulder, something like concrete dust on the lapel. His hair disturbed, his hands at his sides. She looked at his hands, then at his face. He looked back at her. The open expression, rawer now, closer to the surface than she had ever seen it. Behind him in the corridor, his men moved with quiet authority. A radio, distant sirens, the hospital's emergency alarm beginning to build. He stepped into the supply room and crossed to her. And then, in a motion she had not anticipated from a man of his particular architecture, he went to his knees. Right there on the supply room floor, in his ruined expensive suit, he sank down and dropped his head. The posture of a man who had run out of everything. "Don't," he said, his voice rough in a way she had never heard from him. "Please don't look at me like that." "Like what?" Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Like I'm exactly what I've been afraid you'd decide I am. The emergency alarm built in the distance, sirens outside, the supply room very small and very still. She looked at the top of his head, his shoulders. The hands pressed flat against his thighs in the stillness of a man who had placed them there deliberately, who was choosing not to reach for anything because he had already decided he had no right to. She thought about the scrub room, the stairwell. 11 days of perfect distance and replaced light bulbs and a dark sedan outside her building every night. She reached out. Her hand found his jaw. She tipped his face up. His eyes, when they met hers, were stripped of every layer. No control. No composure. Just the bare, exhausted truth of a man who had burned through everything he had left, getting to this room. You came here in a suit, she said. I came here fast. Your men know this hospital's maintenance layout. I had them map it when you transferred in. She stared at him. That's either the most alarming thing you've ever told me, she said slowly, or the most... She stopped. Get up, Do-Yun. Felicia, get up. Not a command, a request. Her hand still on his jaw. I'm not looking at you like you're a monster. I'm looking at you like I don't know what to do with you. Which is different. Get up so I can figure out the difference standing up. He rose. Slowly. And when he was fully upright, she was aware of how close they were in the small room, and she didn't step back, and he didn't reach for her. And they stood like that while the sirens got closer and the hospital began reassembling itself around the wreckage of the last 4 minutes. I'm done, he said, quietly. With that world. I've been trying to find a way out for 4 years, and I kept inventing reasons why it wasn't possible. I am done inventing reasons. She looked at him. I believe you, she said. She examined herself carefully when she said it, and she found, to her own precise surprise, that she did. He kept his word. That was the part she hadn't fully prepared for. What it actually takes to legally dissolve a South Korean criminal syndicate, and why some men spend their whole lives trying. He kept his word with the same precision he brought to everything. She had expected something murky, a slow dimming of something with no off switch, but Do-Yun had built the exit the same way he closed a bypass. Patient, exact, unwilling to finish until every layer was stable. The syndicate had structure. He had spent 4 years mapping a way out that wouldn't leave a vacuum capable of destroying everyone nearby. He built his replacement carefully, without announcement, without drama. It took 7 months. She watched it happen from the particular vantage point of someone present without being at the center. She operated, she lived her life. She had coffee on Tuesday mornings with Do-Yun in the hospital cafeteria, where he had once sat 3 tables away and said nothing. They moved toward each other with a carefulness that felt earned, the right pace for 2 people who understood how much damage speed could do. He made her laugh in October, which surprised both of them. She told him about her past in November. Not all of it, but enough. The parts that explained the hyper-independence and the hard edges and the specific way she flinched from men who wanted to manage her. He listened completely, without interruption, without trying to fix it. He asked one question afterward. She answered it. He nodded and went to get her another coffee. She understood sitting there that she had just been known by someone, and that it hadn't cost her what she'd feared it would. By December, the suit appearances had stopped. He wore his white coat again, exclusively, and it fit differently now, not as a disguise, as the truth of him. The actual truth. The one that had been underneath the whole time. The building transfer completed in February. Filed through 3 holding structures, none leading back to Seoul Central or to him. On a Thursday in March, he found her between rounds. I need you to come somewhere tonight, after your shift. She looked at him over her chart. Request or summons? Request. Please. She went. He drove her across the city to a corner lot in a district she didn't recognize. Somewhere in transition. Somewhere becoming. A 3-story building, new construction, still clean and unweathered. A small brass plaque beside the entrance. She stepped closer to read it. Read it again. A charity cardiac clinic. The kind of facility that served patients who moved through the gaps in Seoul's tiered hospital system, the ones who needed cardiothoracic care and couldn't access it. Fully staffed. Endowment funded. Operational in 2 weeks. She turned and looked at him. "You built this," she said. "I had a reason to build something," he said simply. She turned back to the plaque. She was doing the thing she did when managing something large. Breathing carefully, keeping her expression organized. "Take me to the roof," she said. He did. Seoul spread below them. The Han River catching light in the middle distance. The city's million-lit windows stacked against the dark. The air cold and clear, the kind of cold that makes everything precise. She stood at the edge of the rooftop with her coat pulled close and looked out at all of it. She heard him step up beside her. Heard him exhale. "I spent 32 years, he said, not wanting anything enough to be afraid of losing it." A pause. "I would like to spend the rest of them being afraid of losing you. Specifically, if you'll allow it." She turned. He was holding a ring, not presenting it with ceremony or theater, just holding it the way he held everything. Precisely, with complete attention, with all of himself pointed in one direction. It was beautiful. She hadn't expected it to undo her as completely as it did. "Do-yun, I know who you are," he said. "I know you don't need this. I know you built yourself without anyone's help and you can continue to do that without me. I'm not asking you to need me." His dark eyes steady on hers. "I'm asking you to want me, the way I want you, the way I have wanted you since you turned around at that light board and told me no and made me feel, for the first time in my life, like the world had a specific shape." She looked at him. "You had my coffee order memorized in 4 days," she said. 3, he said. "I gave myself the extra day to be certain." She laughed. Unsteady. She didn't try to control it. "Yes," she said. He breathed. It moved through him like something had been held a very long time and was finally, completely, allowed to release. He stepped close. Not fast, not urgent, but with an intention so absolute it felt like gravity itself had taken a side. His hands came up and framed her face, large and careful, his thumbs tracing her jawline with the same slow attention he had given her cheekbone in that scrub room all those months ago. Except this time there was no almost about it. He looked at her. One long, steady second, making sure, finding in her eyes exactly what he needed to find. And then he closed the distance. It was nothing like the clinical precision of the man she had first encountered in this hospital. It was slow and deep, and completely, entirely surrendered. His mouth on hers, with a reverence that made her chest ache in the best possible way. His hands held her face like she was something he had been careful with for a very long time, and was only now, finally, allowing himself to hold without armor. He drew her close, her waist against his chest, and she felt the last of his careful, controlled composure dissolve into something warm and real, and entirely, irrevocably hers. Seoul glittered beneath them, indifferent and beautiful, millions of lives continuing their orbits. And on the roof of a building he had constructed because she had given him a reason to build something good, Kang Do-yeon held the only woman who had ever told him no, the only person who had ever made him want to hear yes, and was, for the first time in 32 years, in possession of the one thing all his power had never been able to manufacture: a reason to stay. If this story wrecked you, if you've been holding your breath since that parking garage and you need to process what just happened on that rooftop, drop a comment right now. Tell me your favorite moment. Tell me the scene that broke you open. Tell me where you're watching from, because I want to know exactly how far this story traveled. And if you're new here and this was your first time with us, welcome. Subscribe. Hit that bell. Because this is what we do on this channel. We build worlds that feel real. We tell stories that reach through the screen and grab you somewhere you weren't expecting. The next one is already coming. And I promise you, you are not ready.